This is the DRS train.
What makes a good Formula One race? Good side-by-side action, changeable weather, and great strategy. It's unfortunate that we had none of these in today's 2025 Japanese Grand Prix. I'm here with Ashiel and Demeter, and we will now go through and have a look at this race. But we had something before the weekend that came up. The only good thing to come from Mohammed bin Sulayem's presidency in the FIA was him talking about V10s and how they were going to come back to Formula One. So, what are your guys' opinions on that?
Well, my opinion is that it makes absolutely no sense from a practical point of view. The only real reason this story came up of the return to the V10s is because the current FIA president has to get re-elected again. And it appears that maybe that isn't going to happen. So he decided to go for a very likable idea to try to garner the votes and get re-elected. I don't think this is going anywhere, because if it actually were a serious proposal, the constructors, the engine manufacturers would have been involved in the decision. Instead, it came out from nowhere, and the engine manufacturers didn't even know about it. So I think it's just a way to get re-elected by Sulayem.
I mean, you make a fair point. As much as I would love to see that happen, I have to agree, it's not realistic. Especially with the net zero by 2030, especially because they're looking at doing it 2028, 2029. It would pretty much erase that. As V10s, not V10 hybrids, which don't exist. And so it is a Hail Mary to get reelected. It's not going to happen. I hope it doesn't happen. He's probably, in my opinion, one of the worst presidents we've had in recent memory. And that includes literally everyone else. So yes, it would be great. As the last time we had V10s was the mid 2000s, right? So something that probably some of us haven't witnessed, including myself, but it's not realistic. Hail Mary.
Yeah, I tend to agree with both of your kind of perspectives on that, because I mean, there's rumors that if they were gonna come back, they'd bring biofuels, which would kind of offset the carbon emissions and all that sort of stuff. But it does just seem like you guys have said, like a desperate plea for votes, because he is definitely, if not I think one of the worst is a fair comment, but he's also one of the most unpopular FIA presidents in recent history. Because, like, you look at the historical figures that have caused controversy: Jean-Marie Balestre, Max Mosley. At least they had a modicum of knowing what they were doing. At least they had good campaigns. Max Mosley's safety campaign saved a lot of lives in Formula One, even if off track and sometimes on it, he was a bit dubious with his actions. Yeah, I would tend to agree that V10s and all that sort of stuff it's a pipe dream, really, because I mean, as someone who was literally 1 year old when the final year of everyone using V10s was a thing, yeah, I can't say I want to hark back to the glory old days of just as I was born, because that would be facetious of me. But yeah, I think
didn't know about the biofuels though. That kind of sounds like he ripped this off of Cars 2. Not gonna lie to you.
For Cars 2, the worst Cars movie, I suppose. That's quite ironic.
Well, remember, they did a World Grand Prix where they had all different types of cars, and then they were promoting biofuels.
Yeah. It's just a bit tacky in my opinion. Yeah, it is a bit, yeah. With that, I think we should get into the actual race, which, let's be honest, we can get into the race, but it's not really. We can go for each team individually, but there's not really much to talk about. I mean, we have to start with the winning constructor, in my opinion, Red Bull. Even though they were winning, they only had one car in contention, Max, which has been the case, well, since 2019 now, since there's been all the talk about whether Lawson deserved to get the seat dropped or whether he deserved to stay on. First of all, what are your two opinions on that topic? And then what are your opinions on Red Bull this weekend?
We talked about it last week a lot. That's when it dropped. The dropping after 2 races, it's not... it's a very Helmut Marko move. Do I think he was right? No. I think he deserved a little bit more time. It's a learning curve. It's a steep learning curve, especially a V carb to a Red Bull. When it's noted that Red Bull is made for Max and nobody else. So there is that. And there was a conspiracy that this would be Yuki's one race in a Red Bull. I don't think that's true. But there was a conspiracy on it just for, somebody paying loads of money, double the money, to have him in it for the Japanese Grand Prix. Again, probably not true. However, he got his shot. He did okay. No better than Lawson probably would have in the end. But yeah.
Ace.
So, first of all, let's start from the winner, Max Verstappen. He clearly did an excellent job in qualifying yesterday, because today he was quite unimpressive in my opinion. So just I'll explain better. Yesterday, and even in free practice, the Red Bull looked nowhere near the front. Okay, it did never look like the fastest car on at Suzuka. Never. Not in free practice 1, not in free practice 2, not in free practice 3, not in Q1, not in Q2. Then in Q3, on the last lap, Max Verstappen puts it on pole. An incredible lap, because Piastri did an equally incredible lap in Sector 2 and Sector 3. Except he had screwed up Sector 1, where he lost 3 tenths, and he finished half a tenth behind Max Verstappen, and even less behind Norris. So Piastri clearly looked like the better McLaren driver, and we even saw it in the race. The point is, Norris, who wasn't on pace, did no mistakes on his lap, and did no mistakes in the race, so he finished second ahead of Piastri, which is fair. Okay, if you are a team principal, you have to manage your own 2 drivers, and clearly one made a mistake and should be ahead, but isn't. That is what you should reasonably do. You should not hinder any of your driver and just let them race. Basically like Australia and Hockenheim 2010 between Massa and Alonso. Okay, so reasonably you should not have them fight each other. And the end result is that the other driver who did an exploit and put it on pole ended up winning the race. So I give complete credit to Verstappen in qualifying. I think that was incredible. But in the race, I don't think he did anything impressive. I think he did what was expected from him, and then everything else was just McLaren screwing up. It was just Norris not being on the pace of the car, and so he did not meet Verstappen. It was Piastri starting further behind than he should have, and not being able to make overtakes, although Suzuka is very hard to make overtakes, so I actually credit Piastri for getting close twice to Norris, almost making the overtake, but it was too hard. And then I fault the McLaren strategy team for what they did. Even we can debate all day about whether splitting strategy or doing the same strategy with both drivers was better. And I think the real mistake here was pitting Piastri before Norris, because that makes absolutely no sense. You pitted Piastri and got him behind Berman. And when Verstappen was theoretically in front of Berman, so Piastri never would have done an undercut. All you did was force Verstappen to pit at the same lap of Norris, so you cannot do the undercut with Norris. So why do that? I just don't understand. Piastri would never have done the undercut because he exited behind Berman. And Verstappen and Norris instead repeated they exited ahead of Berman. So Piastri to do the undercut should have overtaken Berman, which was impossible, and he did not do that, in fact. So it just makes no sense. McLaren should have won this race, and they didn't, because each one of them, both drivers and the team, made mistakes, made nonsense, were not on top of their games. Verstappen was on top of his game in qualifying and put it on pole, and then in the race he did not need to do anything else, because everything else was McLaren not challenging Verstappen. That's it. So incredible win by Verstappen, because I think he deserved it from quali, not from the race. He deserves it from the race because McLaren deserves it less. That's it. Instead, on the other Red Bull driver, Tsunoda, I think we can all agree that he is better than Lawson on the Red Bull. And I get it, he's still way off Verstappen. he got knocked out in Q2 when he was behind Lawson, Alonso, P12 was Gasly, Sainz, but then Sainz got the penalty, and then Gasly 11th. So he was behind the midfielder cars, but at least he wasn't last, which Lawson was. And you could argue this one performance from Tsunoda is way better than many of the most recent Sergio Perez in the Red Bull. So I'd say it was a good decision to put Tsunoda in the car after 2 races from Lawson, simply because it already is better than having either Lawson or Perez in the car. Clearly, the correct decision here was to put Tsunoda in the car right away from race 1, not choosing Lawson. It simply did not work out. But I was, before the start of the season, among those who understood why they chose Lawson over Tsunoda and actually supported the decision. So I guess I should not talk any more than this.
So last night or this morning while I was watching the race, I kind of not realize what they were trying to do when they put Austin in the Red Bull seat and left Yuki in V-Carb. They were trying to do one experienced driver and one new driver, and under the assumption that Max and Yuki would take both of them under their wings and kind of pick them up, right? Teach them. However, you can't teach Max's driving style. It's just not how that works. So it didn't really work out. Is right now in V-Carb you have one very young team with not a lot of experience. So yes, they're going to be towards the middle of the grid, back of the grid. That's just kind of how it's going to work for a bit, but I'm sure they're going to pick it up. That car is better than the Red Bull car. That's just data.
So the idea behind choosing Lawson over Tsunoda was actually a good one. So the idea was that in the last races of 2024, Lawson and Tsunoda were about equal in performance. So they could have put Tsunoda in the Red Bull, knowing full well the complete limitations and the performance that Yuki can deliver, and then keep in the Racing Bulls Lawson and the newcomer Hajar, which are basically 2 rookies, because one never raced and the other only had 11 races of experience. That was one option, and it was the most immediate one to understand. The reason they choose Lawson over Tsunoda was because if they keep Tsunoda at Racing Bull, then they have a known factor to compare Hajar to. You have an entire season where you have Tsunoda, who you know how good he is, and you can see how Hajar compares to Tsunoda. And so you get a reference point for Hajar. Instead, if you have Lawson and Hajar together, you don't really understand how good Hajar is, because you don't understand really how good Lawson is. So that was the reason to choose Lawson in Red Bull. Not because you want Lawson in Red Bull, but because you prefer keeping Tsunoda at Racing
Right.
Bulls.
Right, which is what
Then we saw that.
Okay.
Then we saw that Tsunoda. We saw that Lawson was even worse than Perez, and so they had to try another driver.
Okay, yeah.
I will just jump in with something. I did some statistical analysis for the entire of Red Bull's second seat dilemma that they've had since, as I said, 2019. And the average gap between Max Verstappen and his second driver, whichever teammate he's been, whether it be Gasly, whether it be Albon, whether it be Perez, whether it be Lawson, any of the guys, the average gap between Max in all races, all 102 races at the time it was, because it was after the Chinese Grand Prix, was 34 seconds. Max Verstappen has put half a minute on his teammate in every single race, on average, since 2019. And that, well, we all knew the car was the reason why his teammates were floundering, because Gasly went to Toro Rosso and instantly started performing, got a podium within 6 months of being demoted. Albon went to Williams and basically carried that team on his back for 2 years. Perez, before he went to Red Bull, was the king of the midfield, was the new Giancarlo Fisichella, was the new, I'm trying to think of other good midfield drivers from the history of Formula One. They've all left my mind. Of course they have. But you get what I mean. And Lawson, don't get me wrong, Lawson's start was worse than any of the other guys' starts. But in their third race, all those guys, Perez, Gasly, Albon, did markedly better in their third race than they did in their first or second. So I think, personally, I'd have given Lawson, like what we're doing with Alpine, allegedly, which is given 5 races. because by the end of 5 races, you usually find that most drivers are up to their 90, 98, 99% of their speed. That's what I'd have done personally. But Tsunoda, it was clearly a right gamble because Tsunoda in his first race instantly had a higher position, and I'm assuming, I haven't done the statistics yet, but I'm assuming he was closer to Max in the race than Lawson was in either China or Australia. So, I mean, obviously Australia, he retired, so we don't know, but yeah, you get what I mean. And it's just, yeah, Red Bull's in an awful situation where they dug their hole in the ground when they gave the car to Max that he needs to win races, and potentially, I don't think he won the championship this year, but he's in contention for race wins now. They've made their bed, and they've now had to line it because they're focusing on Max. You look at all of the, like, even when Schumacher and co were racing and they were the undisputed number one, and the other driver had to jump out of the way. Barrichello never did this bad. Bottas never did this bad against Hamilton. It's the team, it's the car, and Red Bull have dug their own grave essentially.
I really would like to see, before his career is over, Verstappen in another car, in another team. Because we saw Ricciardo after he left Red Bull, he was not what he was at Red Bull. And so I would like to see Verstappen in another car of another team, just to see how good he still is in another car.
Yeah, I mean, I think Verstappen is infinitely better than Ricciardo ever was, because Ricciardo was maybe a 2 or 3 time race winner at max in terms of raw talent, and Max is a 4-time champion, and even more so on pure talent. But I get what you mean. I believe that he would struggle. I don't think he'd be as bad as Hamilton in terms of adapting to bad or compromising car handling characteristics. But I believe he would, like, for example, if you went to a team like, for example, let's say Aston Martin, but let's say Alonso was in his prime, would he be able to carry the team over to his side of the garage so that the car development goes in his way? That's what I'd want to see. Would he be able to handle a neutrally handling car, an understeery handling car? Because we saw in 2024, when they did decide to bring that Red Bull back towards Perez's handling characteristics, he didn't struggle by any stretch. But they were like, for example, Baku. He was losing to Perez on merit in Baku. Yes, that's Perez's best track, and that's the worst metric to measure someone against Perez against. But it would be interesting to see how exactly Max would stack up against another driver in another environment. Let's say if he was to follow in Hamilton's footsteps and go to Ferrari or go and join George at Mercedes, that'd be interesting, because George, we know he's a standard benchmark, and we know he's got the benefit of knowing that team inside out since he was younger. But would Max's overall talent and ability to extract, because I've said the Mercedes is a fairly, at least nowadays, after their 2024 struggle, I'd say now this season it looks like a very neutrally handling car, because they've had to have it for Kimi, otherwise he'd have binned it a million times. It's not as twitchy as it was last year. So I think in a neutrally handling car, Verstappen would be fine. But in an unsteery car, we saw he struggled against Perez in the middle part of 2024. So it'd be interesting to see.
It would also be interesting to see him in a car that's not built with him in mind.
Yes.
That car is basically built around him. There's no fighting about that. There's no arguing about that. It's just kind of fact. And we figured that out pretty quickly, but a lot of things were said about Perez that weren't fair. You're talking about somebody whose skill set and experience is completely opposite to Max. So the car's not built for him. He's just trying to drive it.
Yeah. Trying to stay on the road, essentially.
Right. Exactly.
But it's because, like when it comes to analysing driving styles and being all nerdy about it, Perez had a smooth understeer driving style, similar to Hamilton, where you essentially induce understeer to the car by not putting many inputs in, trying to say he was always known in his early career for saving tyres. He never, not towards the end, it kind of fell away from that. But he was never, and Verstappen is the complete opposite. He's aggressive oversteer. He's similar to what Schumacher was in the early to mid 2000s. And that's what put Perez on a pedestal. Then they thought, okay, it's not the problem of the driver itself, it's the problem of the driving style. So they put Lawson in, who is close to Max in the way that he is also aggressive oversteer, and then Lawson is awful. And then they put Tsunoda in, he's basically the closest thing Red Bull have to Verstappen in terms of driving style, and he's somewhat better, but it's still like, where did he finish? 11th, 12th? That's not good enough for a Red Bull. Yeah, 12th. That's not good enough for a Red Bull driver. That's nothing on Yuki, because we've seen, again, he's not a stonking driver, otherwise he'd have gone in that Red Bull within 1 or 2 seasons. But he is a solid, dependable midfield contender who could prove himself to stay in Formula 1 for a few more years. And he's finishing 12th in a car that is third fastest, maybe fourth fastest. Ace will probably tell me how I'm wrong on that, but yeah, third or fourth fastest, I think. But I'm not exactly sure what he'd think about, especially at Japan.
Yeah, I mean, it's really up to opinion on that one. I think that, again, obviously we disagree, and, Liam not getting enough time or him getting enough time and whatever else, and that's fine.
Yes.
As I said before we started recording, I am one of those people that doesn't like seeing people upset, and when people are upset, it makes me upset.
We love that.
So it's definitely a difference in, personality. However, you brought up Michael Schumacher, and when talking about Max, that makes a lot of sense. We have to remember that Michael helped raise Max into his career. There's a lot of photos of them together when he was younger. He had a lot of exposure. Very small community. Racing is a very small world. A lot of exposure to these different types of driving styles, and so it makes a lot of sense that he's not the tire master, right? Because the people he learned from are not tire masters. We're not tire masters. We're never tire masters. It didn't exist, right? And they even said it in Japan this morning. They said it this morning. Lando's engineer, Will, said it this morning. His tires are dead. You're fine. Keep going. So tires have never been a thing that Max is really worried about. He'll complain about them for sure. He does it a lot. But he's never really truly been concerned about their lifespan.
So I guess we can move on to McLaren now. I don't think we have anything more to say about Red Bull.
That's pretty fair, I'd say.
Okay. About McLaren, I think I already said everything I had to say. I think they lost the weekend on their own. So what do you two have to say about McLaren?
I think you're right. McLaren lost it during the qualifying in Q3. Specifically, Sector 1 for Oscar. James Hinchcliffe, when he was doing the track walk or the grid walk before the race, kept saying, in theory, Oscar could have done this, Oscar could have done that, but it's in theory. It doesn't matter if it's not executed properly, right? So, in theory, McLaren should have won this race. In theory, it should have been Oscar. In theory, Oscar should become the third driver in history to win on his birthday. However, on the Saturday, he had a mistake in the first sector that cost him just enough for Max to pull it out. And because it's hard to pass on the Suzuka circuit, there's really nothing he could have done. Now, he did get close enough to Lando, and honestly, McLaren really screwed up in not switching them. Do I think that it was because they were trying to make their not number one driver happy because they claim not to have a number one driver, even though they clearly do? Yes. But that's on them. And hopefully they'll learn from it and not pull a Ferrari and not learn from it.
Some interesting takes there. I mean, yeah, this is a problem. Modern McLaren, it's like they don't know who they want to identify as. Like, do they want to identify as a juggernaut who wants to dominate, or do they want to act like an underdog who wants to say that everyone else is better than them, but they're still somehow at the top? But the amount of times that Lando and Zach have been saying, every time someone said that mentioned something about them having the best car, they're like, "Oh, it's not that good." And it's like, yes, it is. It's a couple of attempts quicker than anything else on the grid, and there is no doubting that. It's just that Lando and Oscar, then it's not even like Lando is too inexperienced to win a world championship. The amount of times I've heard people saying, "Oh, last year it was his first time in a championship winning car." Every single other world champion in Formula One history, bar Nigel Mansell, Nigel Mansell, Nico Rosberg, and I'm trying to think of any others. I don't think I can think of any others, have won their championship in their 5th season of Formula One. Lando's in his 7th season, and he's got nowhere near. The reason why is because he hasn't gone from midfield machinery all the way up to the top by switching teams because everyone's seen, "Oh, this guy's really good." It's because he stayed with a team that's got good. And he just doesn't have that natural, mental fortitude that other champions have built, because they got their moves, and they got their moves to top teams on merit. I'm not saying that Lando deserves to be dropped at any point, but he basically just got promoted through the ranks of a company that just so happens to now be at the top of the game. And
the fingers up.
and and now for me, Norris isn't a world championship caliber driver. What is going on with my mouth today? And neither is Oscar, really. Like, Oscar, the experience argument is more pertinent with him because he's now in his 3rd season. But then again, these guys should not be making the mistakes they're making. Lando made about 8,000 mistakes in the China sprint. Like, they both made mistakes in qualifying by not qualifying on pole. Like, this is what I'll always say. I bash people like Hamilton for only being able to win in the best car. I bash people like Jacques Villeneuve for only just winning in the fastest car. But at the end of the day, they won. And Lando and Oscar can't say that at this point in their careers. They can't win in the fastest car, which for me is baffling, especially when the Red Bull, the Ferrari at the end of last year, the Mercedes at the end of last year at points, they weren't the best car. They were not even close to being the best. And yet, Lando and Oscar, it just seems like they're in a personal battle to see who can be the worst driver in that car. And it reminds me of like 2016, where Hamilton and Rosberg were both pretty average throughout the season. It just so happened that Rosberg was the one who just eked him out. Or like 1995, where this is the Lando to Max argument in 2024, where Lando bottled a title by just being useless, just like Damon Hill was in 1995. And McLaren need to do something about this, because if they keep their current driver lineup into 2026 and nothing changes, and they keep bottling wins and they keep bottling potential championships, they are going to put themselves in a situation where they look at it like Williams did in 1994 and 95 and say, we had the fastest car 2 years running by a country mile and we got nothing from it because we had Damon Hill and David Coulthard. I saw a comment on a Facebook post, great source I know, about someone who had watched Formula 1 for a long time, saying that watching McLaren in 2025 was like watching Williams when they had Thierry Boutsen and Riccardo Patrese. And I thought that sounded perfect, because Thierry Boutsen and Riccardo Patrese, 2 very good drivers, 2 race winners, but they weren't World Championship caliber drivers. And that's what McLaren have right now. They need to hire, whether it be a Hamilton, whether it be an Alonso, for goodness sake, his 3rd stint at the team, or someone like that, or even try and get Verstappen on board, because Norris and Piastri clearly don't work.
There is only one guy that I truly like at McLaren, and that is Andrea Stella. He came out after qualifying yesterday, and he said, incredible lap from Max. It really showed why he's a 4-time world champion. And I am sure we lost the pole position by a few thousandths of a second. And I am sure both our drivers still had thousands of seconds left in them. So he got a pole that he should not have gotten. That's what Andrea Stella said. And, Andrea Stella is always being honest and real with the situation. So I tend to believe him way more than I would believe the interviews with Piastri on Lando Norris. So that's all I wanted to say.
I have to disagree with you on the not being a good lineup, not being world championship caliber drivers. The reason there's a few types of drivers on our grid. You have the drivers who start at a midfield backmarker team, they work their way up by proving themselves, and then they win. Then you have your drivers who are fortunate enough to either spend 1 year in that backmarker team and then move into their dream team, or start in their dream team, right? You have, which is basically saying like your Yukis versus your Landos and Charles. The reason that McLaren has kept Lando and Ferrari has kept Charles is because they've put all this training, all this money, all this everything into these drivers, and these drivers are reciprocating it back by saying they're not going to move until they bring a championship back to that team. So when it comes to that kind of thing, I'm not sure it's a fair statement to say neither of them are world championship caliber. Do I think that Lando has potential? Yes. Do I also think that you are correct in saying his mental fortitude is a little bit shaky? Absolutely. And I did, in fact, say that his self-confidence can fall faster than the NASDAQ on a common day nowadays. Like, if he's not perfect, it takes him a few sessions to get back up to speed. And that's normal for anyone, honestly. Your confidence gets shook. It's going to take a moment for it to get back to regular space. For Oscar, he's still young. He's still inexperienced, even though with 3 seasons in. So I'm not sure it's a fair statement. Yes, obviously it's a matter of opinion, and I respect that. But there's definitely, we've obviously seen that the team can win a championship. It's just a matter of which driver they're going to favor at the end of the year.
I mean, that Constructors title last year was basically handed to them because Red Bull, after Newey left, just decided to descend into a pile of doom, and Ferrari are Ferrari, and Mercedes don't even know how their own car works. So don't get me wrong, the guys at the factory who build the cars and who do all the strategy, maybe not do all the strategy because that's been dubious at times as well, but all the guys behind the scenes deserve all the credit for winning the constructors' title. And to be fair, so do the drivers for not bottling it in the fastest car. But for me, I just can't. Lando and Oscar, don't get me wrong, they are, as I said, they're not bad drivers. But like when you look at putting drivers, for example, in the tier list, the S tier drivers are your. To be fair, nowadays I'd only put Verstappen in the S tier. Then on the A tier, you've got guys like George, Leclerc. I'm trying to think of other guys like that. Guys like those who are just below that level. They have a couple of mistakes, a bit of inconsistency, or they just don't like. For example, Leclerc has a bit of inconsistency. George doesn't have the raw speed. I don't think that Leclerc or Max do. And then you go to the B tier drivers, and that's where Lando and Oscar fit in because they have several flaws and several inconsistencies that are more so than the guys like George. Like as I said, you put George, Leclerc, Max in that 2024 McLaren, they are winning that title by a country mile. Maybe not by a country mile, but by a considerable margin, enough to do that. And this year, I think it'll be the same. I just think that, for me, Lando is fast. Like, he's slightly off about maybe a tenth off of Verstappen in terms of pure qualifying and race pace over one lap. But he just lacks the... I know Con hates this word, but racing IQ. Because the stuff he doesn't know could fill a warehouse. He is so like socially inept and technically knowing the car setup, knowing how the car handles, he's inept at that too. He can save his tires and he can drive pretty fast. But when it comes to not making those errors, when it comes to those clutch situations, we saw it in Brazil last year. Verstappen went from 17th to 1st. He went from 1st to 6th. And for me, I just can't. I cannot see how. When Lando was given an opportunity in a car that was fastest for 15 out of the 24 rounds last season, and Max didn't. Max at points had the 4th fastest car, at points had the 3rd and 2nd quickest car. How he managed to hold on, and Lando was gaining 1, maybe 2 points around in the fastest car. He reminds me of Damon Hill. Obviously, I was not alive when Damon Hill was racing, but Damon Hill, he was known for that. Like 1994, it took for Michael Schumacher to be disqualified or banned from 4 races in a 16-round season for him to be anywhere near a title fight. And even then he lost it because he sent a stupid move up the inside. 1995, he crashes into him multiple times because he doesn't know how to race side by side. 1996, it took for him to be against a rookie teammate to win by a single-digit margin of points. And then, yeah, it reminds me of Lando because he gets everything handed to him on a plate. You've got the fastest car. You've got a fairly competent team on strategy. Not the best. They aren't the best. They've shown their errors and their ways. We saw it this exact race. But his errors, and he's just usually he makes lots of little mistakes rather than one big one. We obviously saw in Brazil and stuff last year and China in the sprint where he's made big errors that have cost him a lot of positions. But it's usually minimal little errors where not getting pole in the fastest car, not getting those incremental margins that you need when you're in the last part of a regulation cycle. And that for me is why he's not a champion material, because if by your 7th season you haven't ironed those things out, you're not going to iron them out by your 8th, your 9th, your 10th. And Oscar, he has an opportunity, but I just don't think he has that raw speed. He's got the mental side where he doesn't care, or he seems to not care. He's got the side where he can think on the fly, and he's not as passive as Lando, and he doesn't try and point the blame at everyone else. And I think he's got more mental strength than Lando has. But he doesn't have a raw speed that Lando has, which is why McLaren's in this weird dichotomy where if they had a driver with the speed of Lando and the consistency of Oscar and the maturity of Oscar, they'd have a perfect driver. Maybe not perfect, but a very good, in my opinion, championship caliber driver. But for me, like, again, I'm not saying at any point that Norris should have been sacked or moved on before this, because while McLaren were on their way up, people were genuinely saying he was world championship caliber, and I was one of them. And I was saying this guy's on the same level as George, on the same level as Charles, and then he gets in a title-winning car and he crumbles. Now we could see, because we've not seen George in a championship-winning car, we haven't seen Leclerc in a championship-winning car for a full season. That could easily happen to them because we saw it with Leclerc in 2022. He made more catastrophic errors less often, and we could see that. We could see that with the likes of those. Maybe it's just that Max is not just a generational talent, but more of a generational talent than anything we've seen in Formula One history, bar maybe Schumacher and Fangio. But for me, Lando not being able to compete in the fastest car by at least a couple of tenths on a car that saves its tyres well, that has no flaws, no obvious flaws. It's, I'd say, on par with like a 2019 or 2018, maybe even 2020 Mercedes. That, for me, is baffling. How he's not won all of the 3 first races of the season, or how he and Oscar haven't won all of the 3 first races of the season by at least 10-20 seconds, because they aren't the same level as I say, I like to bash Hamilton a lot, but they're not on the same level as Hamilton was when he was dominating, as Verstappen was, as Schumacher was, as Alonso. I mean, Alonso never really dominated per se, but he always showed in a fastest car that he could be up there. Lando can do that one race in 5, and the other 5 he's busy making little mistakes, and that to me means he's not champion material.
Couple things. Is this or is this not a sport about learning? You have to learn in order to progress. That's my thing, because it's a giant science fair. You start with a car, you upgrade it, then you test it. There's a race weekend, right? It's a giant science fair. It's a sport about learning. So he's got to learn everything. It's a new car every year. And I'm not saying this. I am not a Lando fan, if you will. He's indifferent to me. Okay? He's indifferent to me. However, he still has time. Fernando didn't win his championships until 06 and 07. So that's the season 6 and 7?
See, let me think.
05 and 06.
Yeah.
05 and 06. Okay. Sorry, Kimmy. The years I didn't watch are a little blurry. So that's still 5 and 6. That's still pretty late in the game for what you're saying. So even so, Max was year 5, 2021. He started in 2015. Year 6.
Year 7, because you have to count an extra 1. It doesn't sound right, but it is.
Yeah, so year 7. So he's still in the contention. It's still the same thing. It's going against your point, where, if he hadn't made mistakes, and even in 2021, Max made loads of mistakes. Loads. Otherwise he would have, he would have had everything planned out. You had Adrian Newey, you had a decent car. It was the last year of the regulation, before everything switched over. It had it okay. It wasn't a great car, but they were figuring it out. Same with Mercedes. Lewis made a ton of mistakes too. Like, it was an even playing field of making mistakes. What they really need to do is figure out who's going to make a mistake and then prioritize that driver. The Suzuka is not a strong track for Lando. It never has been.
Okay, I understand your point, Demeter. I actually agree. So, Kimi Raikkonen was born in 1979, and he first challenged for a title in 2003. So, when he turned 24 years old, well, he was born on the 17th of October, so basically the entire reason he was 23 years old, but you understand. And it was his 3rd year in Formula One. Today, Piastri turns 24 years old, and this is his 3rd year in Formula One. Alonso was born in 1981. He first challenged and won a title in 2005, so that's again 24 years old. And that's 1, 3, 4. That is 4. 1, 3, 4, 5. 4th year in Formula One. You get Lewis one immediately, 1st and 2nd year in Formula One. You get Vettel. It took him for 2007, 2008, 2009, 2 years and a half to get into winning machinery and then winning a title. You get Verstappen. That took longer, but first of all, Verstappen, so he joined at 17 years old. So by 2001, he was 23 and a half years old. So he won the title at 24 years old. And it was his 7th years in Formula One. But we truly saw Verstappen finally maturing as a driver halfway through 2018. So 3.5 years into Formula One. And Alonso took 4 years, and Raikkonen took basically 3 years. So you see that it takes time for a rookie to mature. By now, this is the time that Piastri should mature, but maybe if it is not this year, it can be the next one. So I think you're being too harsh on Piastri, that's what I'm trying to say, although it's a bit messy. Piastri has improved from last year. Last year, you can count on your hand the number of times he was close or better than Norris. And instead, this year, he has been always close to Norris and has been better in China. And you can argue that he was the fastest driver in here at Suzuka.
Mhm.
So I think that Piastri, aside from the individual races where he's not delivering the best, but he's still within what is expected from him. I expect Piastri to still not be a perfect driver, okay? Maybe if he were a generational talent, by now he'd be a perfect driver. But since he isn't, maybe he's just a very, very good driver. Not generational, but still very, very good. I still have expectation from Piastri, that he's underperforming. I can accept far less that Norris is not delivering as he should have.
That's fair. I think just to clarify what I meant, I'm not trying to bash Oscar. Oscar is, I'm a fan of Oscar, that I will admit. If you're talking about maturity in that way, where you're saying at 24 they mature, they should be in championship contention, and you're counting out George, Charles, Alex, although that's
Yeah,
not really.
don't mention Alex Albon in championship
Yeah,
material drivers.
whatever. Well,
Yeah.
when he was in Red Bull car,
I know what you
whatever. There's a lot of other drivers that still are in the conversation that would be counted out. And so we can't really count on mental maturity because everyone matures at their own rate. It's psychology. I've talked about psychology quite a bit. It's one of my little areas that I studied in university. So it really depends on the person. Lando, from observation, from what we're allowed to see of his life, is a very young at heart person, right? So, and this could be completely unrelated, but from what we are allowed to see of his life, he understands the importance of having fun, enjoying your youth, because clearly he doesn't get to enjoy a lot of privacy or a lot of time to himself. He understands, the importance of setting yourself up for success at your own rate, not pushing yourself to like burnout, because if you push yourself to perform on other people's time, you're going to burn out. So yes, it's probably going to take him a little bit longer, but I don't think we're taking him out of championship contention. I don't think that Oscar's out of championship contention either. I think that he is a good driver that has the potential to do something with that. You don't just win on your first, your second season out of nowhere. Yes, the first win was a little bit contentious, and yes, it was basically like writing in a live episode of Drive to Survive with no editing, but it doesn't mean that he's not a valid option for that. If he wasn't a valid option for that, it wouldn't. I think McLaren is smart enough to say, "Hey, Oscar, you're second driver." They haven't. They said they have the ability to fight each other until somebody comes out on top and it's impossible for the other person to win. They have said that, and I believe I believe they're going to stick to that unless something drastic changes.
Yeah. This whole talk about driver performance, and you mentioned guys like Leclerc and George, which are fair points, and like we haven't really mentioned them in this fight. I think that Leclerc, I think, has been a championship caliber driver since 23, because I think he learned a lot from 22, because he was in a half a championship battle for the first half of the year, made a ton of mistakes, and has now since pretty much entirely wiped out his crashes, you know what I mean? The only one I remember him making, the only big mistake I remember him making where he's totaled a car recently was Miami, either last year or the year before, and that's all I remember.
Miami last year. I was right in front of it. It was 2 years ago, actually. It happened in front of me twice.
Yeah.
Same corner, twice.
Yeah, that's the only mistake I remember Leclerc making. I don't remember George making any big mistakes. No, actually, no, I do remember 2023 Australia when he said Alonso brake tested him when he didn't, and he just made a mistake. Well, he did brake earlier, but he wasn't. George could have easily avoided it, and he didn't. But essentially, those guys, like for the past few years, I'd say if you put them in the championship winning car, they would have won the championship themselves. For me, it's often baffling for me how often driver performance is related to car performance. Like, I feel like if you were to put, let's not take the volatile handling Red Bull, because you put anyone in that car, they're not going to do well. But let's say you put Norris in the Mercedes, or you put Piastri in the Ferrari, or either way around, one of a stable handling, top running, but not but not race-winning cars. I don't think Norris outperforms Leclerc. I don't, ignore the team dynamics and stuff. In terms of pure performance, I don't think Norris outperforms Leclerc. I don't think Piastri outperforms George. I don't think Norris outperforms George either. Essentially, I consider them as worse drivers. This is why, for example, I think that drivers who outperform their machinery on a semi-regular basis are better than ones who perform to their machinery or slightly below their machinery's capabilities on a regular basis. This is why, and I mentioned it in this in the servers I'm in very regularly. Drivers like Pastor Maldonado for me are very underrated for the fact that they could carry cars that were lower midfield at best to podiums, because even if it was on a semi-regular basis and he made lots of errors, for me that showed that he had a lot of raw pace and a lot of talent. Same as like Lance Stroll, he's shown glimpses of brilliance interjected with a lot of stupid moments. Like the whole 2020 season, I've mentioned how the whole 2020 season for Stroll was better than Perez's 2020 season, but no one wants to talk about it. And for me, Norris and Piastri, like, there have been moments of goodness, that's not even a word, moments of good. So like winning in the Netherlands by 20 seconds by Lando, he performed to what the car was expected to do. Singapore, except he nearly crashed about 4,000 times. Abu Dhabi, more so because he led from the front and didn't do anything wrong. But those are moments of greatness. Like, since Lando's got into a championship winning car, I'd argue that he hasn't had as many great moments as he did before he got in a championship winning car. Like, the first 90% of the Russian Grand Prix in 2021 was great because he was beating Hamilton in the wet, and Hamilton's known to be a good wet weather driver, and he was in a McLaren and Hamilton was in a Mercedes. That was great. And he's had other things like beating Hamilton to a podium in Austria was great. But for me, performing to a car's expected capabilities is not great. It's just good. And going above and beyond where the car's expected to perform, because obviously we all talk about like outperforming the car. Outperforming a car is not possible. Physics don't allow for that. But outperforming a car's expected performance is. So that's why I like drivers like Maldonado, like Stroll, like I'm trying to think of other drivers who've historically just battered past their car's average performance ceiling. Verstappen, one of them. And for me, that's what makes a really good driver. What do they do compared to their car's relative performance? Do they stand out as someone who you go, how is that? How have they ended up there? Alonso is another driver like that. And for me, I don't see that with Lando or Oscar. They're doing a good job. They are not bidding the car every single week. They are not doing a Perez. They are not doing a Lawson. They're not doing a Tsunoda. But they are just doing a middling job for a champ. This is supposed to be a championship winning operation. They won the Constructors' Championship last year. They have the fastest car. The expectation in an era where reliability is perfect, in an era where strategy is becoming more and more uniform, in an era where car performance is becoming more and more convergent on the car itself, we should be expecting a team with the fastest car to win every race. Now, we saw even in 2023, when Red Bull had a near perfect season, it wasn't perfect, but they won, what was it, 21 out of 23, or was it 22 out of 23? It was something ridiculous, or 21 out of 23.
22 out of 23, because the only one they didn't win was Singapore, because they've historically been bad at Singapore.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. To already have lost a race win in Japan instantly sees me having bad. Like, I still think that one of the McLaren drivers is going to win the championship, just because Verstappen can pull up these performances out of his arse and be amazing in one race, but he can't sustain that over a season. Not like Alonso challenged for a title like that in 2012, but it was because it was a different climate. The car had better reliability than the Red Bull did, and because the handling characteristics suited him, and because the Red Bull wasn't as dominant as the previous year, and a lot of combined factors. But that won't happen this year because the cars are now bulletproof. If any team has more than 2 or 3 mechanical retirements a season for both drivers combined, it's a disaster, pretty much. Unless your name is Alpine, and then they seem to have those every race or two. And for me, like, don't get wrong, they won't be the worst drivers. If Norris or Piastri was to win the title this season by narrowly edging out Max, they won't be the worst drivers to win a title ever. They'll be close, but they won't be the worst. They'll be better than guys like Phil Hill, Damon Hill, Giuseppe Farina, Nico Rosberg. No, maybe not Nico Rosberg, because Rosberg was more consistent over his career. But the guys like Norris and Piastri, nothing stands out to me. Not in their championship win, not since 2024 when that car has been the best. Nothing stands out to me. Like, they haven't had any. Norris has had his 2 dominant performances that were completely flawless. but they weren't dominant in terms of, like, again, you put Verstappen in that car, I know he would have done better, because Norris won by 20 seconds in Singapore, in the Netherlands, and I was like, okay, good, you did what you're expected to do. And the same with Abu Dhabi. And for me, doing what you're expected to do 2 races out of 15 and then nearly binning it in Singapore when you do the same thing. So even if we count Singapore as a good result, 3 out of 15 races that McLaren was the fastest car, Lando performed to what it was expected to do. That's 1/5 of the time. Lewis probably does it about 70% of the time. Max probably about 95% of the time. To have a 30% conversion rate in the fastest car is awful, frankly honest.
So you mentioned other factors, right? We should talk about other factors. Pit wall, car setup, Isaac's car setup, especially yesterday, where he almost lost his ability to have children because they didn't tighten the belts down correctly. But he still managed to get into Q2. It's really, there's other factors. It's not just the driver and the car. You look at, right? And their pit wall is a mess. It's been a mess for years. The amount of it takes a lot. It takes a lot to switch out a race engineer mid-season. That should never happen unless there's medical leave, right? There clearly wasn't medical leave when they swapped Javi for Brian. You shouldn't be having these setup issues 3 races in for VCARB. You shouldn't be having all these things go wrong on race 3. You shouldn't be having all these things go wrong mid-season Ferrari-wise, right? Because was it 22? It was 23 where Charles was in the lead in Monaco and they messed up. 23, 22? I don't remember. It was one of those two where it was pouring rain.
22.
Yes.
22? 22. Pouring rain, they had him come in and they messed up his entire race at one call. That's not a driver error. That's a strategy error. That's a pit wall error. It's a catastrophic pit wall error. Cost him the entire race and made him wait 2 more years to finally get there. There's other factors than just the driver and the performance, right? You see it with Lewis and his new engineers. There's growing pains. There's communication that needs to happen, You see it with literally anyone who switched a team who needs to get used to their new engineer in their ear, right? You had, let's see here, 2 or 3 different teams talking about swapping towards the end of the race. You had Haas, Alpine, and McLaren at some point, but really that was Oscar trying to get him to swap. Because they knew that one driver was, more adjusted than the other, but they were trying for strategy and it didn't work. Strategy is not, unless you're Carlos Sainz, a driver thing. It shouldn't be a driver thing. It ends up being a driver thing, but it shouldn't be a driver thing. That's why we have race engineers. That's why we have lead strategists. That's why we have all these people on the pit wall watching these radars and watching these screens. Because the driver's only really supposed to be worrying about how, passing the person in front of them. That's the idea. It doesn't end up being that way, but that's the idea.
I think we've exhausted this argument. I think that's perfect time to move on to the Mercedes, Ferrari, the other teams, because I think we've all as a collective yapped on for about half an hour now. Yeah, we can agree to disagree on that one. But should we go to who finished ahead? Who was it? I think Mercedes finished ahead of Ferrari, didn't they? So let's go on to them. Good race, in my opinion. Good race from George. Good performance from Kimi to be only a couple of seconds off, even if his strategy was slightly more favourable. But at the end, he showed very good pace to constantly be setting fastest laps and to show some good form in only his 3rd Formula One race. He's been quiet, but quiet and unassuming. But he's been doing good in these past couple of races. Didn't crash in Australia when all the other rookies seemed to be able to find a way to put it in the wall. Didn't make any mistakes that I can remember in China. And now he's, finishing behind George, but he was only 5 seconds behind George. And yes, as I said, I think that going
1.3.
We say 5.3.
1.3.
Oh, 1.3. Oh, yeah, because he caught Rabian. My bad. That's my bad. And yeah, his strategy was slightly more favourable because for some reason it was quicker overall in the race to go more laps on the mediums than on the hards. But that's a thing for Pirelli to answer to that. But yeah, I mean, we can see now that Kimi's going to be a future world champion because he's not showing blistering pace, But to come into Formula One as a rookie in the modern age and to not show any signs of errors and be calm and collected like you're a that to be calm and collected in the way that Kimi is, it's like he is like a guy with maybe 5 years experience. It's like he is like an Ocon or a Gasly that's come into that team. And he's an 18-year-old who's still in school, who's trying to learn his way through Formula One. And from what I haven't seen him make any major errors. And he might have I think he went out in Q2 in either Australia or China. But he's done well, and I think this race has proved that. And I mean, again, 1.3 seconds behind George. Yes, he had the slightly more optimal strategy, but that's nothing to be scoffed at.
So now it's my time to yap. Okay. But before I start talking about Mercedes, I want to talk about the tires, Pirelli. And I want to go back to China. Because already in China, we had an awful race with hardly anything happening, the tires going way longer than they were intended to, being way more performant than we intended to, and then we get a nothing race. And in China, the reason was everybody was expecting horrible graining. They were expecting a two-stopper. And so nobody in a sprint weekend, so there is only one practice session, nobody used the hard tire. They all use the medium tire. And so Pirelli has to analyze the tires when they get them back. And they get back the soft tire and the medium tires. And they see that both are utterly awful on this track, on the distance. And so what are they to do? Of course, they change the parameters of the tires, the pressures, so that the medium becomes a tire that can race. And they have absolutely no data on the hard tire. So what they did to make the medium work actually turned the hard into a god tire, which did everything possible. Excellent race pace, better than the medium, over way more laps than the medium. So that's what happened in China. That's the reason we got a nothing race. It's because it was a sprint weekend and nobody used the hard tire, so Pirelli had no info on the hard tire. The reason we get a nothing race here in Japan is different. The reason is they simply brought the wrong tire compounds. They went a step too hard. It should have been, Japan, to be good, has to be a two-stopper race. So we get, last year, we get 2023. You get, okay, nobody remembers those races well, but they were more entertaining than what we saw today. At least we got drivers trying to start on the soft tire just because they know they can do a two-stopper, and so they get to undercut twice. And so it's a reasonable choice. Today, everybody went for a one-stopper, and there was no tire differential. And so if you pit sooner, if you pit later, it changed absolutely nothing. You can't even overtake on track. And even if you had a tire advantage, because you went 10 laps longer, you still would not be able to overtake a Suzuka. And so we come to talk about Mercedes. Because let's be honest here, Mercedes was the second best car this weekend. And so being 5th and 6th, that's an underperformance. And it is underperformance because, Antonelli had a huge problem already from the previous race weekends, but this weekend even, he had huge problem on one lap pace. You saw in quali, he did not improve on the last lap in Q1. He was out in Q1. And so he was just chasing and trying to improve to not get eliminated so that he can improve more and try to get to the next step so he gets more lap to improve. And that's the story for Antonelli. At the end of the day, he qualified 6th, and that's good enough. Given that he's a rookie, it's not impressive qualifying 6th place. And then we get Russell, who made a mistake on his last lap in Q3, and so he should have challenged for pole position, honestly. He had an impressive weekend up to that moment. He screwed up the last lap, and he was even behind Leclerc. The Ferrari was not in competition this weekend, and it was only Leclerc who put it P4. It should not have been P4, it should have been P5, and Russell should have been P4 at the bare minimum. And so I think it was rather underperformed from Mercedes, from the drivers. Then in the race, as I explained, because of the tires, nothing could be done about underperforming in quali. So Russell could do nothing to overtake Leclerc. Antonelli had an excellent race, but it changed nothing having an excellent race or not. Hamilton was not going to be a threat, okay? Going longer only allowed him to set two records, which is the youngest driver to ever lead a Grand Prix and the youngest driver to ever set a fastest lap. So that's the only remarkable thing that Mercedes can go home with.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. It is quite a damning indictment of the tyres. So you saying they should have gone a step softer, that does kind of ring bells, because if they'd have gone for soft, medium, what were the soft and the medium tyres, and then obviously the softest of those options below what was the soft in the race, that would have been definitely a two-stop. Like, it would have been probably maybe a medium, hard, medium, because that would be what the tyres would eventually become, would have been the medium and then the hards, and then could be have a medium to the end. That would have been interesting, because also the overtaking was a problem. Suzuka, this is the problem with Suzuka. It's a track that, under normal conditions in most racing series, is decent enough for overtaking. But in Formula One spec, it's not, because of DRS. You can't have DRS going into 130R on the longest straight on the track by a country mile, because if you have DRS going into that, you'll have people flying into the barriers, like Alan McNish style, because they won't be able to hold it open through 130R. And you can't have a system where where it automatically closes going into 130R, and you can't trust drivers to close it on their own, as we saw with Jack doing. So yeah, this track is just not made for modern Formula One. Gladly, they're removing DRS next year, and hopefully, I'm pretty sure replacing it with an energy deployment system. Or no, it's active aero, isn't it? So maybe having no downforce on the front or the rear would make it more interesting going through 130R, because you might actually have to lift there. It would also make it interesting to see if you could then, on the run up to that corner, have what the replacement for DRS will be called, whatever it will be called. Because the current main straight, it's just not long enough to actually produce good racing. The only way you could make that circuit more entertaining in terms of racing and getting alongside other drivers would be to get rid of the final chicane in the Casio triangle, and that's pretty much it. And you don't want to do that, because it would just be like a 30-second long run from Spoon down to the first corner, and your tyres would be freezing cold and your brakes would be freezing cold. And even if, to be fair, if you just put DRS on the main straight while you're already going flat out, that'll be very strange. So yeah, just leave it. But the current Suzuka circuit is not built for DRS racing. And yeah, we saw that. And the tyres, as you rightly pointed out, it is just crazy. For me, it is just crazy how Antonelli, who we can agree wasn't as good as George the entire weekend, can go longer on a set of hards than he does. It's longer on a set of mediums than he does hards, and somehow it's a better strategy to go on the softer tyre for longer and the harder tyre for shorter amount of time. Baffles me entirely. But still, Kimi executed his cards well, played his cards right, and yeah, Pirelli's a mess. Suzuka's a mess. Modern Formula One in terms of the DRS, I'm glad it's going, because although at times it has been necessary, Suzuka is not one of those tracks that needs it, and it needs other alternatives. Energy deployment is the way to go in all forms of racing, because stuff like Kurz in the early 2010s had an element of strategy to it. Like, you didn't just deploy it in the same place every lap. There was, if I'm right behind this guy, I can use all of it coming out of this corner, and then I can overtake him, and then I can hopefully stay in front of him for the rest of the lap. And it makes it so that, because there's no activation and detection points, there's no guaranteed places where you have to make an overtake. Because what DRS has also done is it's made it so that if you want to make an overtake, you have to do it in one of about 3 areas on a track, maybe 2, maybe 1 even. Because if you try and overtake someone into one corner, they'll then get you back on the next straight. And now with that gone for next season, hopefully that will fix it. And that's why Kurz was so good. That's why it was so good, because it meant you could, for example, put a boost on coming out of a slow corner and send a dive bomb into someone in the next corner, or do it going into a slow corner and send a dive bomb on them. And so, yeah, I think we could have seen a more entertaining race if we'd have had those soft and medium tyres be more prevalent by putting them all a step softer. And we could have also seen it more prevalent if the DRS had actually worked, or if it had been betterly implemented at that circuit. Nonetheless, George and Kimi, decent enough races, probably the most middling team in terms of like doing what they were expected to do. And they did what they were expected to do. Maybe you could have argued, yeah, Leclerc shouldn't have been in front, but stuff like that happens. And it's not essentially a terrible result to lose, 2 points, 3 points, 5 points in total, maybe. At least in my opinion. But yeah, that's what I think of that.
You mentioned Jack and DRS, and I do want to talk about that for a second, because after that crash happened and we're all happy he's okay, 50G crash into the barrier is what they said. some reports came out that allegedly the reason that happened is because in the factory on the simulator, that worked. Leaving your foot to the floor, not closing the DRS, that got more lap time. Which, to me, that's not a driver error. That's a calibration error in the simulations, which means it's an engineering error. Now, I am fully aware when it comes to decision making in the cockpit, that is a driver error. However, I think we have to look into where those decisions come from and figure that you only do it so many times if it works so many times, right? Now, with tires, I think you're right. I think that the compounds were too hard. And that could have contributed to a few things, but it's kind of that came into my brain. So I wanted to put that out there.
I will just say that there's a couple of things that could have prevented that. Obviously, I'm not sure if you remember, but I don't fully remember it because I was literally it was only about 10 races of my entire Formula One watching experience, maybe 15 or so. But in 2011 and 2012, on qualifying laps, you were allowed to use DRS wherever you wanted, as long as you didn't crash. The only two places they banned it were the Monaco Tunnel and 130R at Suzuka. And there were drivers who did go for risky ones, like, for example, Sergio Perez. I'm pretty sure the reason why they banned it in the Monaco Tunnel for 2012 was because in 2011, he tried to use it, had a massive crash that left him sidelined for a race. And, well, what I do, if I was Jack Doohan and I saw that it was faster in the simulator, if this is what actually happened, and this isn't just some random publication making it up, I'd have gone to my engineers and I've said to them, in the simulator, this was faster. Will this actually work in the race? Because they're the ones who know how aerodynamics work. Like, Jack Doohan doesn't. I don't believe Jack Doohan has a degree in mechanical engineering. So what I'd have done is I'd have gone to him, or I'd have gone to the aerodynamicists, I'd have gone to the race engineers, and I said, "Will this work?" And if they weren't saying 100%, yes, this will work, I would have said, I would have just not deployed it. And for me, that's got to be a driver error, because at the end of the day, I'm a degenerate sim racer, and I know quite a bit about car setup, and I know quite a bit how to drive fast. Obviously, I wouldn't ever be anywhere near a Formula One driver's level, and I'm not going to try and claim that I would be near a driver's level. But when you come through a corner, there are some corners, slight corners, that you can take a DRS open with. I'm in a League One Formula One 2012 where you can open the DRS in qualifying. Like, for example, turn free at Brazil, the long sweeping left-hander coming onto the straight. You can open DRS through there because it's a very gradual curve. But you can't, for example, turn one at Silverstone. That's too steep because it's too jolty and it's not as gradual and it's not as smooth. Suzuka is a bit in the middle, but it's still sustained cornering. Like, you feel yourself turning through the turn one. It is a turn. Whereas turn free at Brazil, for example, the example I just used, it doesn't feel like a corner. You're just following what the corner was before, and it's just not really. It's not like you don't do anything particularly. You just hold the steering wheel. Whereas in turn one at Suzuka, you actually have to. There's different lines you can take, and there's different approaches, and that for me would make it obvious that's not a corner you can use DRS through. Obviously, these cars nowadays have a lot more downforce than they ever used to back in 2012, 2011. But all of the downforce, pretty much, although ground effect has detracted away, because I think when I started watching in F1, I think it was 70% of all the downforce came from the rear end, which obviously if you take away if you put the DRS on, that's going to take away a good chunk of that. I think with ground effect, it's probably now down to maybe 50%. But still, you take away 50% of your downforce, you're fucked, to be frankly honest. And that's why he spun off. That for me,
it's like turning a pickup truck.
Yeah, it's like rear wheel steering. It's like rear wheel steering. It just completely pirouettes you around, and it's so unnatural. And that for me is why it's got to be a driver error. You have to, if you're going to do that sort of thing, and because you know that DRS through a corner is either going to be a small time gain or it's going to be a massive crash. So you have to communicate with your engineers. You have to communicate with the people around you and say, is this going to work? And if they don't give 100% definitive yes, and if they had have done that, and let's say if this conversation did happen and they told them 100% definitive yes, then okay, it's not the driver error, it's the team's error for giving him too much, for giving him false hope. But as a driver, the first thing I'd be doing, finding out about this information, is telling people. Because the first people that would tell you, that's stupid, that's not going to work in real life, are engineers and are aerodynamicists and people who know what we're talking about when it comes to things. And what they can now do is they can go into their simulator and fix the DRS physics, because if he can go flat out and gain time in a simulator, but in real life it causes a massive accident, that proves there's a discrepancy in that simulator, and now they can go and fix that. Yeah. So for Alpine, that's what they need to know for doing. But unless Ace wants to add anything onto that conversation, I think we should move on to Ferrari. So let's move on to Ferrari. Leclerc and Hamilton, briefly mentioned them already. Leclerc, obviously, much better than Hamilton this weekend. Lewis still seemingly struggling to properly get to grips with that Ferrari. I think we all I think me, Ace, and a couple of others on the podcast have been labelled as Hamilton haters by some of the people in the comments. That's not true, but we kind of predicted this, and he's never been good at adapting to new cars. He's never been good at adapting to cars that aren't fully geared to what he was good at, and I think this is finally starting to show. Obviously, 3 races into a stint at a new team when he's been used to Mercedes his whole life. He's been used to Mercedes power. He's been used to McLaren and Mercedes for 18 years. There's going to be a learning curve, more so than any other driver, arguably in Formula One history. But still, Charles Leclerc is a good driver, and he's a great driver. He was in that A tier that I mentioned earlier. But if Lewis is really in that S tier and is really still in that competition for GOAT status, an S-tier driver like a Verstappen would go into Ferrari and instantly be on par with, if not better than Leclerc. Lewis has only shown that once in the sprint race at China. One sprint race is not enough to solidify what Lewis wants to be. And he wants to win his 8th title at Ferrari. And on the basis of what we can currently see, finishing because Leclerc was 4th, wasn't he? And Lewis finished, 7th? 8th? On the basis of 7th, yeah, 7th. On the basis of early performance, Lewis Hamilton is not championship caliber anymore, or he's just really struggling.
I think he's really struggling. I mean, when's the last time he got used to a new car? 2013? Like, this is, like you said, he's been used to...
As a new team, 2013, yes. Sorry.
Yeah, right. So that's, let's do quick math, 13 years ago. 12 years ago. See, early in the morning, give me a minute. 12 years ago, that's a long time in this sport. That's a whole career in this sport.
Alonso's not won a race since then, by the way.
Right. But that's my point. Like, that's a long time. Also, like I mentioned earlier, he's getting to grips with communication with his team. There's a lot of different things he's going to need to take time to figure out. Set up, what he can do to help his starts. Like, and I'm not sure if he's still doing it because I haven't seen it on board since he switched teams, but like with the Mercedes steering wheel, he was able to put his hand over the top so that he wouldn't downshift. I don't know if he can do that with this steering wheel. I haven't seen it. I don't know if he's still doing it.
He can do it. I'm not sure if it's like more awkward for him, but I have seen him do it.
Okay, so it might be more awkward for him, depending on where their buttons are and what's in that area underneath his palm. There's a lot of different factors when it comes to the Ferrari. It's a very different car. It's very different power. We've said that. It's going to take some time. Most drivers, like you said earlier, take about 5 races to get to grips. I know the F1 TV commentators also said that. Carlos is giving himself 5 to 10 races to get to grips with the Williams. But Vowles doesn't think he's going to need that much time. It's going to take some time. But I think they're going to give it to him because it's an adjustment. Not just a cultural shift adjustment. It's a full body surrounded adjustment.
So I understand your point, Nedzo, when you say that Hamilton is no longer a championship level driver. I disagree. Because I believe that at this point of their lives, you cannot fault a driver who is struggling with their own car for not being at the level they used to be. So it is obvious that any driver is going to be at their best when they have a car they like. And you can argue that any driver who still delivers excellent performances, even though they don't like the car, is doing an excellent job. But at this point, when you're talking about 40 years old, when we're talking about Luis Fernando, I can understand anybody saying that they are no longer championship level. I think everybody who says that has to keep in mind that if at any point they get back to a car they like, that they can drive to their most enjoyment, and they deliver again their own level of performance, then it means they still have got it. It's clear that clear that Hamilton hasn't had that kind of car since 2021. It's clear that Alonso hasn't had that kind of car since 2023. And I can understand anybody saying that. I prefer to judge them on the performance they had the last time they had a car they liked. So Hamilton was still an absolute icon of the sport back in 2021, and Fernando in 2023, when he had a car he liked, he was just delivering at the best possible with the car he had, just like Verstappen was doing.
Yeah. Obviously, Lewis knew going to Ferrari that this was going to be much different to anything he'd ever done before. Both McLaren and Mercedes, he was either the number one driver or slightly favoured in the team. Against Alonso, he was favoured. Against Kovalainen, he was favoured. Against Button, he was slightly favoured, if not, like it was probably the least of all of his teammates. Against Rosberg, it was more equal as well, but at the end of the day, probably slightly favoured by the team because he was brought in as that big money move. And then with Bottas, obviously, like we don't even need to explain why he was favoured. And then Russell, as maybe it was argued it was more equal, but still he had that legacy of being that 7-time champion. Obviously now he's gone to Ferrari, and I don't see Ferrari biasing towards him. There was stuff with the suspension. They've gone from, I think is it push rod to pull rod or pull rod to push rod? They've gone one way or the other, and that's supporting Hamilton's driving style. And they've gone and they've done a couple of other things with the car to basically make it more easy for Lewis, because him and Charles have not completely opposite, but more polarizing driving styles. I think Leclerc I'm not sure if he's aggressive oversteer or if he's smooth oversteer, because he used to be aggressive oversteer, I think, but now he might be more refined. Whereas Hamilton is smooth understeer. So Leclerc prefers an understeery car. Hamilton prefers a pointy car, because you want the car that's the opposite to your driving characteristics or the opposite to your driving style, so that it balances out. And Lewis, as we've said, he has to adapt to a new culture, new language, new team, and he's not had a big adjustment like this before. If he'd have done this when he was 30, if he'd have gone to Ferrari instead of Mercedes, for example, we could have been looking at a different learning curve. But Lewis, I think his results over the past few years have been patchy at best. And he was propped up by the fact that he knew that team. And when he did have those one-off performances, like 2024 Vegas, for example, where he qualified badly, but climbed up through the race and did decent enough to get back to second and a couple of seconds behind George, he could lean on the fact that he had a team behind him that he knew would support him, and he knew how to get the most from his team and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think Lewis has been a truly world-beating championship caliber driver. Like the best. I don't think Lewis has been the best driver on the grid since 2018, and that's part of. This is part of the whole people thinking I'm a Hamilton hater. I'm not. It's just that I think that guys like Verstappen took over in 2019 and 20 for me, and obviously in 21. I think Lewis has just been too mistake prone, and he's like a better version of Lando Norris, because he has the upper performance ceiling, and his errors are less common. He's less prone to those errors. But we've seen it, like China Sprint, he pulls off a good performance. That's prime Lewis. But then in the other races, he's 7th, 6th, 8th, or 9th in Australia. And then obviously, I don't know where he was before he got disqualified in China, but I think it wasn't. Was it top 5 or was it 6th?
4th and 8th.
Was it? Was it 4th and 8th for Ferrari in China?
It was. They were spread.
I don't
think
remember
they were together.
That's fair. That's fair. But what I'm getting at is it wasn't good, or it wasn't like
5th and 6th. 5th and 6th was.
Okay. So yeah, like he's not horrendously behind Charles. This isn't like the worst start to a champion's renaissance at Ferrari. This isn't but nowhere near that. We've had some stinkers. Like I'm trying to think now. I mean, it's annoying. Nigel Mansell started off well at Ferrari. Alan Prost started off well at Ferrari. So I can't. But essentially, what I'm saying, even though it's not maybe on the level of Prost or Mansell, it's not horrendous, and he's not binning the car every 5 seconds, and he's not finishing 11th. So it's not bad. But then again, this is the whole argument. I've had people say to me that Lewis Hamilton is the GOAT, the 7-time champion with 105 race wins and 104 pole positions, and that he's just so much better than everyone else. But the real GOATs are the ones that go into a new environment, that go into an awkward situation where the cards aren't stacked in their favour, and they pull something out of the bag. Alonso's not in my top 10, ironically, but something like Alonso could do. Something like Max has done in the past. Something like I'm trying to think of other drivers. Lauda has come back from adversity. Graham Hill, Jackie Stewart, all those guys that have been on that level. Ayrton Senna, Alan Prost, all those guys. I'm going to just keep listing out my top 10. Michael Schumacher and who was for Jim Clark. Those kind of guys who can pull back from adversity and go, you know what? This is why I'm really good at what I do. And Lewis this season hasn't shown anything like that. I mean, yes, it's 3 races. Yes, we've got to give him a chance. But the GOATs are the ones that instantly perform. And Lewis historically has never done that. he's historically built his way into a season, and like even in his best title winning campaigns, like your 2015s, like your races, like your seasons like that, he's not been the best starter. And maybe this is just proof that he's going to go on to, I don't know, start equaling Leclerc by the 6th race and then start beating him by the summer break. But I don't think that's going to be the case. He's 40 years old. He's not going to get any better as a driver. Like drivers very rarely. Alonso kind of had a weird phase where he seemed to be better in 2023 than he was in 21 or 22. But you could argue that's getting back to grips with Formula One and getting back into the groove of things, and the car being better, maybe exaggerated, maybe that his performances were just as good as in the Alpine, you just didn't see them, that kind of thing. But with Lewis, I don't see anything like that happening. He's not been like 2022. He was worse than George, even if slightly. 2023, he was slightly better. 2024, he was markedly, especially in qualifying, worse. Although he recovered in the races, he made his bed and lied in it by being bad in qualifying. And this year, I have a feeling it's going to be the same thing. I don't think it's going to be as bad because I think he's realised just how poor 2024 was from him. And he hasn't been miles off of Charles Leclerc, who is a better qualifier, in my opinion, than George Russell. But it's a case of, do I think he can win a race this year on the current pace of Ferrari, given where Mercedes are, they're above them, given where Red Bull are with Verstappen, they're above them, given where McLaren are? I don't see it. Unless they bring some amazing upgrade package to a race like Monza, where the driver isn't as dependent, I don't see Lewis or Charles, for that matter, winning a race unless there's some sort of tyre strategy miracle that they pulled off, like at Monza last year. Because I don't think their car is as competitive. I think they've dropped the ball a little bit and just let Mercedes and McLaren eke in front, and that's what's cost them. Because they were an outside shot for the constructors' title last year. Now, if they get anything more than 4th, it's a miracle.
Just one thing, an open question.
Yes.
So, last year, Hamilton, as you said, was struggling in qualifying. Nobody understood why. And then in the races, he was perfectly fine. He often was better than Russell in a race pace. But in qualifying, just for no apparent reason, he was never good. It was never at George's level. Now we get Antonelli. Antonelli has the same exact behavior. So Antonelli's been struggling a lot in qualifying, all 3 races. And then aside from China, where he said he had damage on the car, but Australia and now Japan, he was perfectly fine in the race, immediately on George's level. So one wonders what is going on the Mercedes car. At this point, it is no longer Hamilton. Maybe it is the car. You know, this open question, of course, nobody can answer it now. We need more races. Maybe by race 12, Antonelli has no problem no longer in qualifying. And so it really was a Hamilton issue. But right now, there is the question, maybe it was never Hamilton, it was the car all along.
I think you're partially right. There's a lot of conversation around drivers like Lewis, Lando, Kimi, drivers that struggle over one lap and can hook it up throughout the race. And there's Charles, who's the exact opposite. He's very good at hooking it up over one lap and then struggles for race pace. It's going to be a few races before we can tell which is true for a lot of drivers, but I think right now we're seeing Kimi be the first of the two, where he's very good over the race, but his qualifying pace is not on the same level as Mr. Saturday, right? And that's okay, because honestly, that's unless you're in like Monaco or Suzuka where qualifying really matters, you're not going to pass anybody. It's okay to kind of lose some time in qualifying, in my opinion, and then make it up in the race, because obviously the race is where you earn points if you can do so. You don't want to lose so many points or so many places, but you know, qualifying is not the end all be all tracks, ideally.
Okay, anything more to add about these topics?
I think we've exhausted it for Ferrari. I think yeah, we can, yeah.
We can move to the midfield.
Yeah, who was the highest midfield team in terms of finishing position? Hadjar. So we'll go to VCarb then. So good, in my opinion, good weekend for Hadjar. Quiet one for Lawson. I'm surprised. I mean, he outqualified Tsunoda. And then in the race, just seemed to just do nothing. I mean, Hadjar, obviously, we've already established on previous episodes, I don't like Hadjar. I'm not going to be as aggressive as I was previously with my disliking of him, but he put in a good performance. So yeah, I mean, I guess there's that. So yeah, he's put in some decent-ish performances since he embarrassingly crashed out at Melbourne. But yeah. So what are your guys' takes on that? Because I'm pretty flat for in terms of opinions.
So to talk about VCAP, but just the midfield in general, I want to establish a baseline that whatever happened in qualifying completely dominated the race behavior in the midfield. So we got at VCARB, but also at Alpine, at Haas, at Aston Martin, and at Williams, that there were drivers that qualify way better than their teammate. So Hajar was starting 7th place, Lawson was 13th place, Sainz was starting 9th place, Albon 9th place, Sainz was starting 15th place, Alonso was starting 13th place, Stroll was starting last, Berman was starting 10th, Ocon was starting 17th, I don't even remember, but I think I got it right.
He qualified
18th.
18th. He might have started 17th.
No, then he started 18th because nobody took under any other grid penalties aside from Sainz, which dropped him from 12th to 15th. Gasly qualified 11th, Jack Doohan was 19th place. So you see that basically all the midfield team except for Sauber had one driver better than the other. And the midfield is so close that the driver who was faster in the team qualified way ahead than the other. And this meant that in the race, where nothing could be done to change the qualifying results, there was one teammate way ahead of the other. So we get Alonso 40 seconds ahead of Stroll. We get Albon 20 seconds ahead of Sainz. We get Berman, I don't know how much ahead of Ocon, but way ahead because Berman was in the points. Ocon was, I don't think it was top 15. So you get that the midfield is so close that just qualifying meant everything this race. And so, of course, at VCAB, Lawson, who has come over from a different team and he clearly has not the same experience on the car as Hajar, Lawson was completely out of contention. Probably the VCAB is really the 5th best team on the grid, even the previous races. Because I thought up until now that the VCAB was a really good qualifying car, but then lacked the race pace because for no real reason, just because we didn't see a proper race on VCARB. But now that we saw a proper normal race on VCARB, I see that I was wrong. The car is competitive both in qualifying and in the race, and it probably is only fighting with Williams in the race. Instead, every other midfield car is better in qualifying than in the race. So, we saw today Berman, he was finished 13 seconds behind Albon. On the hard, he did not have the same pace as Albon. And behind him, there was Alonso. And Alonso was not catching Berman on either compounds. And behind Alonso, there was everybody else stuck behind Lawson. But even then, you get the drift.
Yeah. VCAB. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add. I'm not sure if Hannah does.
No. I have to agree. I don't think that there's much else to say on that.
Yeah. It's a good performance from the team, particularly Hajar. I hate to say it because he's annoying, but yeah, decent enough. Who was next on the team's list?
Albon
to Williams. Right, Albon. It's a copy and paste. One driver did.
Yes.
You've just explained this. One driver did well. One driver did not so much. And yeah.
Okay, let's add Sainz did. I guess it's never the driver, it's more how the team manages it. Because we all saw it at the end of Q2 that Sainz ended his lap and then he got in the way of Lewis Hamilton, who was trying to start last lap in Q2. And so he got an impeding for that. And I guess it's Sainz's fault, of course. This happened because at the pit wall he was not properly informed of the incoming car. Probably I don't think Williams was aware that Hamilton was starting a lap.
I think that, it is copy and paste, like you said, just to not to reiterate anything. But most of the drivers that are behind their teammates, it's the teammate that's been in the car in that outfit before versus the teammate that's just starting out. And it's going to take some time for them to close that gap. And I think once they finally figure it out, you will see a close in that gap. I mean, the only one, actually, no. The only one where that's not true is Ocon and Behrman, where they're both equally new to the team.
Yeah.
Okay, but one is a rookie, the other should have done way better in qualifying. I don't know what happened.
I don't
Haas,
like
because
Ocon. I don't like
Hmm.
Ocon. It's a known fact. I'm going to stop there.
Maybe Behrman's just a goat. Maybe he's just a future 10-time champion.
could be. I think the reason is that I saw it perfectly when he was teammate with Alonso, that Ocon tends to have half the weekends where he's really on top of it. And when he's on top of it, he's as good as Russell, Leclerc, Carlos Sainz. And the other half of the weekend, you wonder, what happened, Esteban? Where did you finish? What went on? And so I guess this is just one of those weekends where Ocon was nowhere for no apparent reason. And I thought he had ironed those out, because at the beginning of 2024, he had, 6 races in succession where it was just good. Okay, he was on his game. And then it all unraveled when he was dropped by Alpine. I kind of understood why Gasly eclipsed him later on in the year, because he was the outgoing driver and the team was in an uphill when Flavio Briatore came in. And so I understand why Ocon dropped his performance later on. But why he was way slower than Berman here in China, I don't know. Maybe Berman just did an excellent job, okay? It could be.
Yeah.
Anything more to add, Nedzo?
I mean, yeah, but although I do support him, I didn't really follow Behrman's race massively closely because it was just good. Like, I would put him, we'll get to the tops and flops later. So actually, maybe I won't say that, but he definitely did do a good job. We still don't know where that Haas car stands, by the way, because it was the worst in Australia, it was decent in China, and now it's decent with one driver, but not with the other in Japan.
Yes. Okay. So just one thing. I did say in Australia that maybe with a cleaner weekend, we see a way better Haas, because clearly they had a lot of problems. But now I question myself, because that Haas car was last year was way better in the race than it was in qualifying. Like in the race at moments, I truly thought it was as good as the front runners. This year, aside from Australia, but in China, it appeared to be the same behavior that in qualifying was okay, so, but then in the race was really strong. That's how Ocon got 5th place, and Berman went up to 8th place because it was good in the race. And now you go to Japan and it's complete opposite. The car was actually very competent in qualifying, and then in the race was not on the hard compound. It was not at the level of the Williams or the V-Carb. So yeah, you're right. I really don't know where to put Haas. I'd say right now the midfield is V-Carb and Williams, and then half a step above Aston Martin, Haas, Alpine. And these two groups, I don't know how to order the teams inside of them. Anything more to add?
Honestly, I think they're all kind of level and just like a mix of just you could throw them into a hat and pull one, you might have an equal shot of they did okay.
So we can move on to the next team. 11th place, Fernando Alonso with Aston Martin. So the Aston Martin, last 2 weeks ago, they finished 12th and got 2 points. And this week they finished 11th and they got none. But yeah, really nothing to say. Stroll was never at the level of Fernando since first lap in free practice until the very end. And so it's clear that Stroll underperformed because he was not. That was not the case that he was off the pace of Fernando in China and in Australia. So clearly, this weekend Stroll had an off weekend. We will see if this persists. And meanwhile, Alonso had a perfectly reasonable qualifying, a perfectly driven race, and there was nothing to do. So that's the level of the car we finally see. It's either 7th, 8th, or 9th best.
I will partially defend Lance. Obviously, from what I saw, qualifying was his own fault. Qualifying last was his own fault. I think he made a mistake and he couldn't improve on his lap, or he got invalidated or something like that. So that's his own fault. But the race was completely stiffed by that awful strategy, going softs for 10 laps, then mediums, and I assume he made another pit stop for another set of mediums later on. Like, you're never going to recover from that. And with the lack of overtaking, with him literally starting last, with him not being able to use the softs at the start to gain positions, he was screwed either way. So I'm not suggesting he was by far a great drive. It was not by far a great drive masked by him not being able to overtake or anything like that. But I do believe that he couldn't have really done much, to be frankly honest. I wouldn't put him as one of the worst performers, even though he finished, I think, last on the road. Which is probably a bit counterintuitive, but I wouldn't put him as low as other people might, because I think a lot of people bashing him for no reason. So yeah.
Want to add something, Demeter, about Aston Martin?
Aston Martin, I kind of have to be impartial about. Fernando Alonso, to me, has always been a very good driver. And they showed that. They were able to give him somewhat of a car in 2023, but then it kind of just fell flat. I'm really interested to see what they do next year. I feel like this year they're just kind of limping along until they can get Adrian into their workshops, which is why I kind of abstain from giving a real opinion on them right now, just because I feel like they're not putting in their full effort, if you get my drift.
That's fair enough. Who's next?
Alpine, I don't remember where Gasly finished.
12th.
Probably 14th place.
Okay.
It was Lawson 15th, and then the last lap they showed the battle at the end of the midfield with 5 different cars, and I don't remember the order, so I think Gasly was ahead of them, so it's 14th place Gasly.
I mean, he put in a decent enough race and a decent enough weekend. Doohan obviously less so. He's got to go from that seat, surely. He's had Australia, where he crashed out on his own fault. He's had China, where he caused multiple incidents of his own fault. He's had Japan, where he crashed in practice of his own fault, in my opinion. We can argue the toss about that, but in my opinion, he should have been more open with his engineers about that sort of stuff. And now he's just not that. There's nothing. Like with some drivers that are out of form or under the weather, or there's something going wrong with their racing, you think there's something here. There's a modicum. Like even with Hamilton, he has a sprint win now under his belt, and we can say there's clearly something there. But with other drivers we've seen with Alonso, like for example, he's had a decent enough race here, but you can go, okay, maybe his first 2 races were an anomaly. But with Doohan, you've got nothing. Nothing from the last race in Abu Dhabi from last season, nothing from Australia, nothing from China, and nothing from this weekend in Japan. That man is not equipped for Formula One. He's not a bad racing driver. To be in Formula One and not to be showed up 2 seconds off the pace is already an achievement in itself. But this is a man who finished 3rd in F2 2 years in a row. He couldn't beat the likes of Teo Pourchaire and Frederic Vesti over the course of a season. This is not someone who should be in a Formula One seat. Bring Franco Colapinto in there. He might crash the car every now and again, but I'd much rather someone crash and get a 10th position every other race than someone who gets 18th every race because they're not good enough.
This is kind of where my opinion might be a little bit gray. I don't know if we in a situation where Jack is great for marketing. He's proven some skill. We don't know if it's the needed skill, but it's some skill. But they're probably going to push him back for marketing. They're keeping him because it's gaining them favors where they didn't have favors before, right? You have Franco, who you bring up, who is excellent for their approval rating, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah,
because social credit points, exactly. He's great for their marketing. They're pulling in. They've got 4 reserve drivers. That's insane considering you cannot, if it ends up that way, you cannot put 2 of those reserve drivers in a seat due to rules. That's insane. I can see 2, but 4 is unnecessary, and not legal. If it comes down to it. So it comes down to the point that they're probably keeping a couple for marketing, and if it comes down to changing them out, you're going to keep Jack in a position for marketing. Do I think that he has the potential? Yes, I do. But I don't know if he's truly there to be a driver full time.
I'll make a couple of points. First of all, the point on having many reserve drivers being illegal, I can see it being immoral or it being daft or it being stupid or whatever word you want to use, but I wouldn't call it illegal because it's not. Like teams could have 25 reserve drivers if they wanted to. It just wouldn't be useful.
That's not what I meant. That's what in the regulations you can only have 4 drivers in 2 seats per 2 seats.
Because of what happened to Andre Moda in '92. Even though teams have gone over that since. Notably, Lotus in 1994 had 7, I think, because that was Lotus in their final year. But yeah, I get what you're saying. There have been memorably there have been a lot of reserve drivers. Teams have had a lot of reserve. Ferrari for a while, I think, had 3. They had Marc Genet, Luca Badoer, and Fisichella, and Bianchi, I think, in 2010. Or no, Badoer left. No, Badoer was there in 2010 still. And then like Marussia Virgin in 2011 had they had Yamamoto, they had Joseph Kral, they had some other. Essentially, they had quite a few. I can't remember them all now because it's Marussia in 2011. Who gives a fuck? But yeah, it's clear what they're doing. They're just trying to have lots of options. Obviously, like I think Colapinto is the main option, the one they brought in from Williams on a lease, on a loan. Paul Aron is the next best one because he has Formula 2 experience, and I don't think he's racing anything full-time at the moment, but he's up there and he's around about there. Then you've got Kush Maini, who, let's be honest, he's only there, I think, because they want to try and capture some of the Indian market and maybe some Indian sponsors. And I'm trying to think of anyone else they have in the current lineup. I can't think of anyone. Am I missing someone?
Ryo Hirakawa?
Yes. Literally, like, I swear he's driven in practice sessions and test sessions about 8,000 different teams in the last 2 years. Like McLaren, Alfa Romeo. I've got, like genuinely, like, this is a man, like, of all the Super Formula drivers and all the drivers who have come from Japan and have been successful, I'd never heard of him before like, last week. Like, I'd known who he was, but I'd never heard him doing anything, like, in terms of racing. Like, I'd heard of people like Ritomo Miata. He's been in F2. People like that who've been in Super Formula and done decently well. Like, obviously back in the 2000s, obviously guys who don't drive anymore, but guys like Satoshi Motoyama, people like that, guys who you knew were around that sort of scene. But I've just never seen him before. So I don't know why he's been putting these. Is it just because Alpine maybe, instead of going to Al-Sadies, they want to go to Al Toyota or Al Honda or something daft like that? I don't know. I don't know what the logic. Or maybe they were just thinking Japanese driver, Japanese Grand Prix, a little bit of extra marketing, an extra 100k won't hurt anyone. But yeah, for the actual race, there's nothing to talk about because Gasly did a decent job, as you expect from Gasly, because he's a good midfield driver, and Doohan was just I actually had a stroke in the midway through a sentence, but you get what I mean.
Well, I think it goes back to that confidence thing that we were talking about earlier. You shake your confidence, it dies, and then you got to build it back up. And right now, he doesn't have much, if any, at all. So
yeah, it's a shame he doesn't have any driving talent either. But not any, but you get what I'm saying. Who's next, Ace? Because I don't think we've got anything else to add about Alpine. You're muted.
The last team, Sauber, obviously. So
have we gone through all of them now? Is Sauber the last one?
Yes. We started with Vicarb. Then we move on to Williams, Haas, Aston Martin, Alpine. That's 5 of the 6 teams. So the last one is Sauber, which had Hülkenberg and Bortoleto out in Q1, with the only midfield team with the drivers close to each other. And even in the race, Bortoleto was not far behind Hülkenberg. Clearly, it is the worst car, and we saw it. Nothing more to say, nothing less to add.
I think this is another team that they're just trying to get to next year. When they off it switch, they're not putting in their full. They're not really putting in their full potential because they're saving up to switch over. So there's no point in them. There's a point in them trying their best, but they're not going to try their best because that's money and resources that they can save for next year. So I honestly don't have a full opinion on them at this point. That's fair.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. It's just they're just there and they exist and they're there to make up the numbers for now. Hülkenberg's a good driver. Bortoleto seems to be dependable and he seems to be good for a rookie, just quietly doing well. Like maybe a watered down version of Antonelli. But yeah, there's not really much to talk about with Sauber. So I think that smoothly and perfectly transitions us over to the tops and the flops. So the top 3 drivers / teams, if you want to put a team in there for some reason, and the bottom 3 drivers / teams, or you could even I think in Qatar last year we said the FIA was in the flops because they did awful in that race. But yeah, so for me, best driver of a race over weekend as a whole has to be Verstappen. I'd put him first. Second, I'd go in my completely unbiased and unbiased opinion, Behrman. Then third of all, it has to be who should I put there? None of the McLaren drivers. No, you know what? I'll put Antonelli. Antonelli can go in there as for best driver. What are you guys thinking for your who are your tops?
Well, I would put top three literally the best three qualifying performers. So Verstappen, Leclerc, and Berman.
I have to agree with Verstappen. I think I have to say Isaac for the fact that he was able to perform and pull a Q2 even though his setup wasn't, he couldn't focus, and he was uncomfortable and in pain.
His balls are being crushed. Literally.
Yeah, okay, if you want to put it not so eloquently. See, you admit that, and yet you tell me he didn't do well. And then probably I'm gonna say Oliver. It's a biased opinion because it's basically what he should be doing after his performances last year, but different car. So I guess Verstappen, Ajar, Behrman.
And flops, do you want to go to Ace first? Because I can't be asked to say it to start again.
Okay, so flop of the race, well, of the weekend, Stroll, yeah, 2-1 because he crashed the car. And then the last flop would be, I don't even know, Piastri because he should have won the race. But, it's such it is such an uneventful race. Then it becomes hard to even distinguish the drivers. So you got Yuki Tsunoda getting driver of the day. The reason is obvious why. But if you truly had to choose another driver of the day, who would it be? Max Verstappen, obviously. But then, there are so many other drivers you could say they had good races. Albon, Alonso, Berman, Hajar, Leclerc, Russell, Verstappen, okay, I said it. Gasly, basically half the grid you can say had a good race. So it's really hard to do a top three. And then because there are half of the grid that did a good race and the other half did a bad race, so who do you choose for flop? It's hard to choose because there is too much to choose from and too little to distinguish each flop from the other.
What do you think?
Stroll, Sainz, and Sauber, Steak as a whole.
I'm gonna for mine note a point that Cons just made to us in the chat. Number one has to be Pirelli for bringing the worst tire compounds in human history to a race, and I'm obviously exaggerating. Second for me has to be Doohan because how you can be slow and crash prone and still be in Formula One is beyond me. And third of all, I'll say, who should I say? Because I'm not going to say Stroll because I don't want to pile on him. I'll say Sainz because just like I thought he was going to come into that team and instantly start doing better than Albon because I thought Colapinto had showed him up last year and the Albon was clearly not the level that we thought he was. But it seems that either because I've heard there's been rumors that Sainz has been that 2024 has been using a 2024 chassis. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But he needs to buckle his ideas up because if he doesn't, then he's going to make Alex Albon look like a good driver, and I do not want that happening personally. Well, not. I mean, like a great driver because Sainz is in that A tier category usually as of last year. But I think with that, I think that should bring the podcast to a close. Then, I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope the guests and hosts have enjoyed it too. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. You can follow us on X, Instagram, a couple of other social media platforms, and yeah, stay safe, and we'll see you all later. Bye.